I would say, did your daughter or son or whatever you're calling your child today, because they said it was fluid and they could make up their mind anytime they felt like it, believe in Santa? I'm like, of course. I'm like, oh, okay. So the child that believes that there's one man, one big fat guy that flies in the sky on a sleigh with reindeer and drops off toys all around the earth at the same time on one day, but the child that believes that is capable of understanding that if they take Lupron, that they could become sterile or infertile.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
All right.
Real Texan.
Why should this matter to real Texans?
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Real Texans. We're joined today by somebody who was a member of the Texas House, actually as a Democrat, has since changed parties and now has a lot of interesting insight into not only the modern Democrat Party, but also the Texas legislature, politics as a whole. We are joined today by Shawn Thierry. Shawn, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me. A pleasure.
If we could start things out with your story. So what led you into public service in the Texas legislature in the first place?
Well, it was really, I like to say, just kind of divine intervention. It was not something I planned on. For those who don't know, I'm a lawyer by profession. In 2016, this weird thing happened where there was all these special elections. A Senate seat became available because a county commissioner passed away in Harris County. Rodney Ellis, the senator of the Senate District 13 at the time, decided he wanted to be county commissioner. So he ran for that seat in a special election. He won. That left the seat vacant. So then Senator Boris Miles, who was then a state rep, said, well, I'm going to run for SD 13.
Right.
He ran and he won. And then folks start coming to me and saying, if that seat becomes available for House District 146, you should run. You're popular. For those who don't really know, some of these special elections are decided by precinct chairs. All of those were. And so I knew a lot of people and a lot of senior citizens, because I used to do a lot of work for the elderly. And so they asked me to run. And I was like, well, okay, I'll do it. And now looking back, I'd like to say that probably was the beginning of when the Democratic Party truly, they didn't really accept me then, because Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's daughter, Erica Lee, ran the race against me. And so from the very beginning, a lot of people don't know that story. Yes. I rarely talk about it, but from the very beginning, I was perceived as an outsider. Well, lo and behold, that was my first little taste of a machine coming against me. I wasn't well funded. It was a special election. And people were like, there's no way you're going to beat the Congresswoman's daughter. That's just impossible. Every elected official is for her, what have you. Well, I had just kind of a grassroots campaign. I went door to door, and lo and behold, I won.
Right.
And so that was probably, now that I look back at it, the beginning of me being seen as kind of the outsider. I wasn't really the progressive candidate. I was a Democrat, but just pragmatic and moderate in my ways.
So when you were first elected as a Democrat, what were your priorities then that you were campaigning on?
Universal priorities, as I saw it. I kind of had my breakout issue on maternal mortality. Most people couldn't imagine a freshman legislator getting the governor to add the issue of maternal mortality to the special session call. So that was the year that we had the special session with the bathroom bill and what have you. And I just really started advocating for women, women in who were seeking to give birth and wanted to have healthy pregnancies. And I know that issue had been touched on before I really took it on, but I shared my own near-death experience in childbirth. And I started talking to Republicans a lot about it. And they were like, Shawn, you're the first person that's kind of presented this to us in this fashion. And I said, this is a right to life issue. These are women that are choosing life. We can't have healthy babies without healthy moms. And so people are like, well, that makes sense. And they're like, and so, you're not saying it's my fault. I'm not a racist or anything. And I was like, no, it's not about that. We're all on the same side here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote a letter to the governor at the end of that special session because the maternal mortality task force had been sunset. And we wanted to renew, I guess you would say, that task force.
Mm-hmm.
So I reached out to Senator Colcourse.
Mm-hmm.
On the last day of session, it's sine die. Everybody was out partying. And here I'm a little freshman. I'm in my office and I'm still typing on my laptop. And they're like, Shawn, just give it up. You know, it's over. Go home. Have fun. You're a freshman. You passed some bills. Good job. Go on your way. And I said, no, this is really important. And they're like, she's never going to sign on the letter with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I think she will. I've talked to
Senator
her.
Colcourse being a Republican, right?
Yes. So once again, they're like, I was like, no, she really cares about women's health care. And so I wasn't jaded. I didn't really believe in, I can't sit next to this person because they're a Republican. I can't work with this person. So I called her office and I sent her the letter. And she was like, this is really good. Yeah, girl, put me down.
Mm-hmm.
And so off went the letter to the governor. Everyone thought, well, there she is. She's kind of delusional. When the governor issued the resolution, or his proclamation, should I say, that there was going to be a special session, he listed all these items. And then I remember the last one, I was sitting there and he goes, and the issue of maternal mortality needs to be addressed in Texas. So I started screaming like, oh my gosh. So he did. And so I kind of started raising national awareness on that issue. And so that was one of my big breakout issues. Mm-hmm. But from there, session after session, I just tried to build a bipartisan record. I passed numerous pieces of legislation protecting the elderly from financial exploitation and abuse. That's something everybody in Texas cared about.
Right.
I had this slogan, don't mess with Texas, don't mess with Texas seniors.
Mm-hmm.
I got into the human trafficking space, anti-human trafficking. I passed multiple bills going after the scourge of the earth, people that are sexually exploiting and trying to commercially exploit children and people.
Mm-hmm.
I did that. I passed a big bill to protect children from e-cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
The only bill in the country, by the way, that requires that no longer allows packaging of e-vapes to look like candy.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't put cartoon characters anymore on it. All these things that will really protect kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you could say my issues were kitchen table issues.
And it seems like a lot of these issues were revolving around protecting children. Ultimately, it was some of those issues in your last session of the legislature in 2023 that ultimately led to kind of the Democrat Party pushing you out, right? So let's talk about that. Was there a single moment that pushed you over the edge, or was it more of a gradual realization?
Looking back, it was gradual. It felt like an epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself at a real crossroads when the issue of mutilating children became front and center. And I just call it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
All these fancy manipulative terms like gender affirming care, they're not real. It was the transgenderizing of children, giving children puberty blockers, giving children as young as 11 and 12 cross-sex hormones, allowing children under the age of 18 to get a sex change.
Mm-hmm.
So when that came about, I think that was my third session.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, no, it was my fourth session.
Uh-huh.
My fourth session, I really couldn't believe it was happening. There were other issues where I was usually not on that side.
Mm-hmm.
I had, the session before, I had taken a stance on the heartbeat, on the Born Alive bill.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me in a little trouble too. I got my I got my wrist tapped on that one and almost really, really got in a lot of trouble for that one. But that was the bill that simply said that in the process of having an abortion, if the baby were to survive, the doctor would do everything possible to help the baby live.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe then that the Democrat Party was saying, no. Don't vote for that. And I was like, wait, what? What are we saying here? That's murder, right? We were saying a baby is born and we're not going to pass legislation to keep the baby alive. And so I voted for that, the Born Alive bill. And I remember sitting at my desk that day, and the moment I pushed the button, phone started ringing down at my desk. Planned Parenthood was calling. They were all on me. I think one of the heads of it lived in my district, and she was like, What are you doing? Was that an accident? You go back up there and say your machine malfunctioned.
Mhm.
I was like, but my machine didn't
Yeah.
malfunction.
It seems to happen a lot in the Texas house.
Yeah. So that one, though, was so wildly unpopular for Democrats that they backed down on it. So the next day, I think it was third reading, we kind of got issued an edict that said, well, you can white light it.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that may not know, that's basically president not voting. That's supposed to mean you have a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
Again, how could you have a conflict of interest in terms of saving a baby? But that happened then. So people kind of started watching me a little closely. And then the very next session, we saw the complete exploitation of children, which is what I now call the war on children. We saw pornographic books in schools.
Mm-hmm.
We saw drag queen story hour being read to kids. We saw the invasion of this ideology in all of our classrooms. And then ultimately, we saw boys and girls sports,
Mm-hmm.
biological boys stealing trophies and scholarships from girls. And so I really started to align myself more with all of those policies because they were just common sense to me.
Mm-hmm. And that's when you've talked already about it a little bit, but kind of the Democrat machine revving up, against you before speaking out on those issues. What does that look like when that happens?
Well, the rumor mill at the Capitol, there's no secrets around there. They call it Capitol High. So the buzz started to get out that, the day that the bill was brought to the floor, Dr. Tom Oliverson was the author of the bill in the House, Senator Donna Campbell in the Senate. There were some murmurings that Rep. Thierry may be voting for the bill. So they started sending these activist groups to follow me, pull me in the hallway, come to my office. And I was willing to meet with people. And I did meet with them prior to that. A lot of LGBTQIA plus groups came by. They sent this gentleman, I can't remember his name. I think he's on a popular TV show called Queer Eye for the Straight Guy or something like that. They sent him to my office.
So they pulled out all the stuff.
Yes, everybody was coming. And I'll say this, everything that they said actually just cemented my position further that this is completely insane. Everything that they were saying, they had no justifiable basis for telling me that a child that believes in Santa Claus is capable of making an irreversible lifelong decision. And when I would ask them that question, they would just look at me. I would say, did your daughter or son or whatever you're calling your child today, because they said it was fluid and they could make up their mind anytime they felt like it, believe in Santa? I'm like, of course. I'm like, oh, okay. So the child that believes that there's one man, one big fat guy that flies in the sky on a sleigh with reindeer and drops off toys all around the earth at the same time on one day. They're supposed to believe that, by the way. But the child that believes that is capable of understanding that if they take Lupron, that they could become sterile or infertile. They know what that is. That's what you're telling me. That child is capable of later understanding that if they cut off healthy breast tissue, that's a double mastectomy, and they don't have cancer and the breasts aren't coming back. So the scuttlebutt got out there.
Sure.
And I told, I've only shared this story a couple of times. I told Dr. Oliverson, I said, because there was all the back and forth on the mic, the Democrats were on the back mic chubbing and calling points of order all day on the bill to kill it. And I was just sitting at my desk kind of quietly. And I told him, I said, Dr. Oliverson, I think I'm going to speak on the bill for it. Mm-hmm. And he's like, are you serious? And I said, yes, I want them to understand. I said, because I've been talking to Democrat colleagues, and when I ask them, do they know what Lupron is? They do not. They don't know it is a chemical castration drug that we give sex offenders. They don't know that it's a chemotherapy drug that we give men who have prostate cancer. I said, so I need to let them know what's happening. And so he's like, well, okay, right on, sister, And then it got a little more tense throughout the whole day. Things were getting a little personal. The names called, they were name calling folks and calling people bigots and transphobes and all of the usual. And Dr. Oliverson and a few other of my Republican colleagues, men and women, came over to me and they pulled me to the side and they said, Shawn, we were thinking and we were talking, maybe you shouldn't say anything. And they said, we all know you're on the side of right and how you feel. Everybody loves you. You work so hard. You're doing good. We think that they're going to destroy you if you do this. It may be your last session. And I paused because I can just feel it. I said, you guys are probably right. And I said, but I can't go along with this. And then so they said, well, do you want to just vote and don't say anything? And I said, I think that's worse. No one will know why, and I said, and hopefully I can enlighten some people. And so what I will say, what was incredibly probably foolish of me or even naive was to think that if the Democratic caucus at that time was faced with plain truth, with plain reality of something that was actually causing harm to children, that at least some of them would stand up and say, no, this is no more. This is wrong. And so I prayed about it, and I was probably almost the second to the last person to speak that night. Mm-hmm. And I got up, and I think somebody told me it was 12 minutes. And I stood there and I gave that speech, which at that moment became life-changing. Immediately afterwards, we can get into it, life changed as I know it. Mm-hmm. The death threats started, the attacks, everything you can think of started from that moment, pretty much sometimes until today.
I want to encourage folks, by the way, if you haven't seen this video, I mean, it sort of went viral after this debate because you did such a great job laying out exactly what the issue is and speaking to Democrats and saying, guys, this isn't what we should be for. There's at that time, 60 some odd Democrats in the House. You were the only Democrat to vote for the bill?
I swayed a few.
You swayed a few.
And the caveat to that is if you go listen to the speech, you'll hear my voice quivering, and I was almost in tears because I'd gotten no sleep. Mm-hmm. I had been doxxed. They had leaked my phone number, some of the LGBTQ organizations, and I had to turn my phone off. People were calling me all night, threatening me, saying horrible things. And so I really was I was sleep deprived, I was exhausted, but I pushed forward. So when I finished, you kind of could first hear a pin drop. When the vote finally took place, and I hope I'll say their names because it's on record, I know 3 other Democrats. I think it was 62 or 3 at the time. Mm-hmm. Only 3 had the courage to stand with me or to vote with me. Rep. Harold Dutton voted for the bill. And then I think 2 others who retired, who knew they were leaving. And by the way, Harold, they had actually gone after him the session before pretty viciously, right. The progressive posse, as I call them. Uh-huh. And so I heard later that they had to make a decision. They didn't want to split the money. And so they were so angry with me. They were like, well, we'll just leave him alone this time and give him pass. We're going to go after Ms. Thierry with all that we've got. Mm-hmm. He said he listened to it because I asked him, why did you do it? And he said, I don't say anybody could have heard a word that you said and have done anything any differently. Mm-hmm. Others, right before I spoke, came to me, those who said they were my friend, and said, Shawn, listen, you've been running all around here, showing us papers and articles and trying to prove how wrong this is for kids. One rep told me, we know, Shawn, but hold your nose. Hold your nose and vote with us if you want to come back.
You mentioned, as soon as that speech happens and, shortly after session ends, campaign season starts. And you're running for re-election, but you're running essentially against the progressive posse, right? But really the whole Democrat.
That's our new phrase.
The whole Democrat. Yeah, I mean, essentially the Harris County Democrat Party was against you in many ways. And what was that like?
It was vicious.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find a consultant. Everyone that I knew stopped speaking to me, except for maybe I can count on my hand who continued to talk to me. Anyone that I would try to hire a political consultant was sent by them to kind of almost like, it was like something out of the movies to be a spy, to sabotage my campaign. They began this, just the machine came in full force. Top politicos, Beto O'Rourke came out against me. The union, the AFL-CIO, which I could not figure out how the transgenderizing and the mutilation of children became a labor issue. Mm-hmm. They were the main ones. They put foot soldiers on the ground. They flooded my district, block walking every area of the community, saying lies, saying that I took away vital health care for children. Mailers that called me a book banner, because I stood up against, I stood up to put ratings on books, much like a rating at a movie that says sexually explicit.
Right.
These are the folks, by the way. If they had been around, these radical progressives, this progressive posse, if they had been around in the 70s when the Motion Picture Association of America started putting, ratings on movies, NC-17 or rated R or PG-13, these are the crazies that would say, oh, that's a violation of the First Amendment of my free speech.
Sure.
So I spoke on that. I showed them some of the horrible materials and dared them to read them aloud. Some of them like, oh my God, that's filthy, Shawn. I can't read that. I said, you're a grown man. You can't read it, but you want my child to read it, So they called me all those things. They put all that out there. They block walked. They phone banked. They found the perfect, wrapped up, radical progressive ideologue. The person that ran against me identified her, self-proclaimed, as a dual identity queer Black woman and union activist, by the way. So that's who they propped up. I believe I've heard almost upwards to $1 million.
Wow.
In a state rep race.
Yeah.
That's not a flippable district, right? Within the same party.
Yeah.
And so I worked really hard, but it was insurmountable. I almost pulled it out, but then got pushed to a runoff because they also ran a third candidate. To split the vote.
Sure.
He also was identified as a Black male, gay, HIV positive male who would be the first, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, all the boxes were checked. So I got pushed to a runoff. And I always say that even though I fought really hard in the runoff and I had the endorsement of many Black churches who tried to come and help, I knew when I didn't win outright that night that they smelled blood. And I prepared my family and the few little friends I had left. I said, girl, I don't think we can pull this off because they smell blood. I even predicted, I said, they will drag Joe Biden himself down here and drag that man around and door knock against me if they have to. And they doggone near did. They got everybody. So day after day, Democrat after Democrat was, coming out against me. So I lost the runoff. And from that moment on, that was just all of the firestorm, the backlash. And what some people don't know is this party of tolerance obviously isn't so tolerant. It wasn't enough for me to lose my seat. I got fired from my job at my law firm. I ended up moving because people were driving by my house, putting signs in my yard, threatening my 83-year-old mother at the time, my daughter. This is all that I really endured. But I try to tell people, though, because I think this is important, because other people are going to have to continue to speak out. Losing a seat, it is something. But losing your soul is everything. And I did not lose my soul. I would do it all over again and again to be able to stand for what's right. And we've seen now the tide shifting. President Trump won. Thank the Lord we can get to that. I endorse him. And one of the first things he did was declare there are only two biological sexes, men and women.
Right. We've only got a few minutes left, but I want to touch on a couple things before we have to go here. One being, I'd love to know, do you see, we had President Trump win in November. We saw big gains even in Texas, along border counties, et cetera. Do you see a bit of a realignment among some of these formerly Democrat groups?
Well, we saw it. I mean, I think almost, 20 to 25% of not the typical Democrats, but Black males voted for President Trump overwhelming. Hispanics did as well. I think that they have gone so far off the reservation that people aren't going to come public and say it, but they will go in that booth privately, as we saw the mandate across the country. I mean, Kamala Harris lost every swing state. Did she win even one?
I don't think, no, not a single one.
She lost every swing state, which lets you know that when it comes down to real truth, that things simple like men can't have babies and that children shouldn't be castrated, that the average American, Black, white, Hispanic, Democrat, Republican, Independent, deep down knows the truth. Now, the bad news is they didn't back down. Some of the radicals, the progressive posse, is doubling down. You could look at the race for mayor, the primary race the other day in New York.
Yeah.
He said the first thing he's going to do is put $65 million of taxpayer money back into transgenderizing children. So they haven't backed down, but I think day by day, the more that we rip the lid off of this, people are walking away. And so that's one of the reasons people ask me all the time, why are you still talking about this? And I'll tell you why. Until castrating children is illegal in all 50 states, I'm going to keep talking about it. Until it is no longer legal to put biological men in women's sports or in women's prisons for that matter, I'm going to keep talking about it. And there are so many other issues. I mean, the legal immigration issue is a real issue. It threatens the safety of our neighborhoods. And a lot of Democrats, they're just not willing to talk about this. So I've been talking. I went back to the community. In the Black community, so many people said, Ms. Thierry, what happened? You lost. I said, did you vote for me in your mind or did you vote with your feet? And so some of them like, I didn't know. I never thought that would happen. I didn't go vote. And then they said, it's what's really happening. And when I tell them, I will tell you, they are in disbelief. The secret is still a secret. We talk about it, but only the true politicos know that the modern day Democratic Party, it's not the party of your parents, believes in sterilization, castration, and mutilation of children, as well as the sexualization of children.
Right. We've got about a minute left. I have to ask before you go, after leaving the Democrat Party, you're now a Republican. What's next for you? Do you ever think you'd run for office again?
People ask me all the time. So when I left, I had that moment, that crossroads moment where I said my values no longer align. When I announced my switch at the Moms for Liberty Summit in D.C., and I already met with Governor Abbott, I didn't do it because I had some political ambition or aspiration. I did it because I wanted people to know this is the right thing to do. This is what I believe. I think I just opened a Substack and I called it Called Not Canceled. And I have some publications. I have one called Truth Over Tribe. I haven't published them yet, but I think I'm just going to go out there and raise awareness and encourage other men and women of good conscience and good courage to stand up for our children and stand up for our country. Now, if I can be impactful and help other candidates behind the scenes or by doing this, I'll do it. If there comes a time where I need to run, as you know, I don't run from a fight. I'll stand up for what's right. But it's got to be the right seat, the right position. And I've been doing a lot of work with the grassroots part of the party. I was the first, I think, Black elected official that wasn't a lifelong Republican to endorse President Trump. I spoke at the Women for Trump rally. So I've been doing a lot, and I just appreciate the embrace. Thank you all.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us, Shawn, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Real Texans. We will be back next week.